talking to book people about books and other stuff.
Hello everyone, it's Lottie here from Mr. Bees. I am very excited to be introducing a chat I just had with the lovely Jessica Gaitán Johannesson, who is not only a wonderful debut author of this brilliant book, How We Are Translated, she is also a Mr. Bees employee, wonderful Mr. Bees bookseller, who you may know the voice of from the Mr. Bees podcast. You'll also, if you're a local, be familiar with Jess knocking around the bookshop. It's an absolute pleasure to have Jess releasing a book which we've all been kind of present in the writing of. She's been writing it for a number of years now, and it's very exciting to finally see it out on the shelves. So without further ado, here is Jess and I having a chat about How We Are Translated. Hello, Jessica Gaitán Johannesson. How are you?
Oh, you just said my second surname in a really Swedish way. It was brilliant.
I will take that. I will take that. Obviously, we are all incredibly excited because not only are you one of our lovely esteemed colleagues, but you're also the proud book mother of this charming little book just here, which came out in, oh gosh, a couple of days ago now. Was it the 11th?
Yeah, it came out on Thursday. Yeah, and that's the proof you've got there. This is the proof. This is the finished copy,
which is beautiful. It is absolutely
my little with my wee little note sticking out.
You're a true author now. You can tell you've got your kind of post-it notes, and it's very fitting as well because post-it notes are a prominent feature in the novel. So you've done it right. You've kept it according to.
Yeah, no, the publisher did sort of have a kind of a fun time with the post-it notes, and so many people have mentioned that when they see the book or when they got the proof, they were trying to take the post-it note off.
It genuinely, they've got the shadow just right. Every time I'm like, oh, I'm going to catch. Oh no, I'm not. I'm fine.
No, it's stuck there. It's part of it. Yeah.
Lovely. So I think what would be really great, and I don't know, just because of the way you've launched your book, whether or not you've done a lot of this yet. But I was wondering if you could introduce the book to us in a couple of short sentences. Like it's a rite of passage to do like a soundbite version of the elevator pitch.
That's so evil, Lottie.
You're welcome.
Absolutely hate that. So I mean, how We Are Translated is really the story of two people, although it's told from the perspective of one of them, and they're two young people living in Edinburgh who she finds out that she's pregnant, and the way that he deals with it is to basically become obsessed with this idea of learning her first language, which is Swedish. And so he kind of makes up a very meticulous plan and locks himself in their flat for a week to do that through immersion technique, which in some languages is kind of referred to as like a language bath. They use it in Finland, for example, for kids learning Swedish, and they use it in different places. So and I just sort of got stuck on that idea of a language bath, which is really what immersion means, doesn't it? It's like you are plunge you in and then they take you out. So the book follows these two people over the course of a week, and the main character, Christine, she also works at a kind of living museum, which is physically in Edinburgh Castle. This museum doesn't exist in real life, but it's called the National Museum of Immigration, and it kind of sets out to the spiel is that they celebrate the multiple cultural heritage of Scotland and all the different groups of people who've arrived over the ages. But really, it's, of course, as most of these things, a lot more corporate and kind of insidious and sort of exploitative than that, really.
And you, obviously, the book is set in Edinburgh, and that's a place that you lived for a number of years. How many years were you in Edinburgh?
I think it was 4 or 5, maybe 4. Yeah, it feels like longer, but I think it might just
Yeah.
have been 4 years. Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
you've every now and again you've got a real Scottish lilt, and I'm like, there it is. There's the Edinburgh coming out. It's
Yeah.
brilliant, absolutely
Yeah, I
brilliant.
think we've talked about this. I feel
Yeah.
like, at least in my experience, when because English is not my first language, I don't have a natural English accent.
Mm.
So that does make you a little bit of a sponge. So
Yeah.
you and or a chameleon that you adapt to sounds around you and the culture around you, and you very easily pick up different accents because there's no sort of base layer, if that
No
makes
kind of
sense.
natural state for it. Did you ever think to set the novel in a different place? I mean, obviously Edinburgh is a very big part of your life, but when you came out of Edinburgh and when you were writing, kind of expanding the story, did you ever think to set it somewhere different, or was it always just naturally Edinburgh?
No, I think I did actually. And but a lot of it fell into place once I decided to set it in Edinburgh.
Mm.
I actually find writing about place really difficult, and it's something that and not just in terms of writing a story, but relating to place is
Hmm.
is something that's really complicated and that I'm thinking a lot about now with the stuff I'm writing now, and I think that is to do with moving around quite a lot and having an international family and growing up with different homes, that it's just identity doesn't necessarily and belonging doesn't necessarily come from place.
Mm.
I sort of hugely admire writers who give you what we refer to as sense of place,
Yeah.
because to me, um, that comes from maybe other things, and the focus is more on cultures and the way that we relate to each other and the way that a sense of belonging is created amongst a group of people, and
Mm.
language is obviously kind of part of that, basically.
I think that's is really interesting because when I was reading the book, I felt like it had a very strong sense of place. But I think I put that in the realm of the people, the kind of the very minor characters. The woman who lives downstairs, and the people that you meet on the bus. There's all these kind of small, kind of peripheral figures who felt very Edinburgh. It felt right, and it that had a real sense of place to me. But when I think about it, it was explored more in those characters, in this kind of cast that you have around the city. But I would say, yeah, I feel like it had a very strong sense of place. And in terms of researching the history of the place as well, because that's a very big part of the narrative. You talk about the kind of the history of the people who've moved to Edinburgh, who've shaped Edinburgh's history. How did you go about researching, especially when you weren't in the city? Because I can imagine that makes things a little bit trickier.
Well, I mean, first of all, it's the way that the museum in the book works is like it's different groups of people. It's very much the National Museum of Immigration, so it's Scotland. It's like
Mm.
some kind of fabrication of Scottish like national identity built out of the celebration of all the peoples that have come there at
Mm.
some point, because it's a supposedly a celebration of multiculturalism. So researching that was much broader than Edinburgh. It was just looking at and more getting ideas for what the museum would look like. So I found out about this Lithuanian community that was really well established at the beginning of the last century in Newton Grange, and sort of found out about different like Italian groups who set up restaurants, and the main character plays obviously a Viking back from the 10th century.
Generalized,
And yeah, and
yeah.
like it was mainly Norse people from what is now Norway who
Mm.
came over to Orkney and came over to Shetland and those islands, and also parts of mainland Scotland. So there was quite a lot of research involved in that, and involved in specifically to do with kind of Norse settlements in Scotland. At the same time, I was constantly aware of the fact that this is like, I'm not writing a historical novel. I'm writing about sort of a false writing of history, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like the research the aim of the research that I was doing was so that I could create the museum, which in itself has an agenda and gets a lot of stuff wrong. So I think in itself that kind of gave me a way out. It's like, there are probably things that are wrong in that book, but it's not my fault. It's just the museum.
That's a brilliant get out of jail free clause.
Yeah.
I mean,
I tried not to, and I because I felt like I need to choose to get things wrong.
Yes, yeah.
There's a reason behind it, but that's just to say that I think the research and the approach to research would have been very, very different if I was like writing something actually set in the 10th century on Orkney.
Yeah. Trying to kind of distill. And I wanted to ask about the setting as well, and the museum, because it's such a fascinating space, and I think we've both worked in heritage, so we've both seen those places which have a real kind of rooting in history and are really trying to celebrate history, but are also highly commercialized and kind of sanitized, and are there kind of really purely at the end of the day to make some money. Why did you want to create this setting? What was so important for you to kind of get this message out there and to create such a almost duplicitous institution?
Well, a couple of different things. I think initially the museum itself just came from different places that I've worked in, and seeing how, as you were saying, the celebration of culture and heritage almost and has to live alongside this commercial gain, and what do you prioritize? And I've worked in a couple of different places like that, so that's where that came from, and the weird situations that sometimes arise from that. But then, as I was actually kind of finishing the book and writing the first draft in 2017, this was after Brexit, after the Brexit vote. So that sort of brought something else into it, really, which was the hostile environment, to be honest, and the fact that the UK government is making it increasingly difficult for everyone, for people to just have a safe space to live where they are, which is a basic human right. So that sort of fed into it, not in a very obvious way, but just this idea of having to be a useful immigrant, having to prove your place and show that you've contributed with something very specific and contributed much more than anyone else who was born here in order to be allowed to stay.
Yeah. I think that comes through really nicely in the book, this idea of, and I suppose that's kind of part of what this museum creates, is this kind of pigeonhole of, you're an immigrant from this place, so you serve this purpose, and you are an immigrant from this place, so you serve this purpose. And I think you're so right in that with Brexit and with all of that happening, there felt like there were all these tick boxes, and like you went through the whole national oh gosh, what was the test called? Which was laughable.
The Life in the UK test.
That which was absolutely mad. And it's like, not only do you have to, prove that you're bringing something into the country, you have to also have this knowledge, which no UK national who was kind of born and raised in this country has. It was such obscene kind of questioning, and it felt so daft. And I think to this day, I start like the sportsman and oh god, all of those ridiculous questions.
Well, I mean, I should say that I've forgotten a lot of it now. So
I hope so.
That just tells you something about the kind of studying that people do for these tests.
I know. Oh god, it did just feel completely obscene. And it was very interesting to see it, I think. And until you've kind of spent time with someone who's doing that kind of test, who's going through all those stages, you don't realize just how challenging it was. I mean, it was months upon months of applications, and yeah, it was
Yeah, and I mean, I should definitely point out that that's the easiest side of, you know, UK immigration system. Like, people who come to this country as refugees are stuck in horrendous limbos and conditions for years. So there's like it's like the very, very tip of the iceberg, really.
But I think having a discussion like that in fiction is a wonderful way of making it approachable and making it digestible and relatable in a way that sometimes I think you can't get. You can't have that personability in a different format. And I think you do it really wonderfully in this book by having that. You know, there's so many factors into deciding whether or not Kristen and Kieran are going to keep the child, but you have these lovely little glimpses into kind of all of these outside factors and all of the kind of wider world decisions that they're trying to make within this one little, I say little, obviously absolutely huge decision, but this one
this one little thing.
This one little thing. Do I have a child? But it's just wonderfully done. I thought it was brilliant. I thought it was lovely. So something that I wanted to talk about, and I think, if we may, we're going to get a reading from Jess as well, is your use of language in the book. And obviously that's one of the major themes, and there's a really interesting way that it plays out. And something that I wanted to show anyone who's watching is that you've created a really interesting layout. I'm trying to find some pages which have got it in. So you'll often include both the English and the Swedish on the same page, kind of textually together. Was that always a plan? Was that something that you always wanted to do in the book? Is that how you wanted to lay it out from the offset, or did that kind of develop as you started writing?
It came out really early on, just as when I started writing in Christine's voice. And because of the setting, the fact that the book kind of starts with this sense of shock and personal crisis, because not only has she found out that she's pregnant, so change in some way is coming and is inevitable, but also the person who's closest to her in her life has kind of made a decision without her, which is also, in a way, a kind of rejection of their life, because I think she's perfectly happy with the little safety that they've created and the little kind of palace that they have, and all of that is about to come down. So starting from that point, the like double voice in two languages came just really naturally, I think. And at the same time, it's just something that I think like that in many ways. Like, I think if you grow up speaking different languages, you always have that multiplicity in your head. There's not just one way of saying things. There's always, to varying extents, there's always that multiplicity. And sometimes you find that, oh, I wish I could sort of say that in this other language because there's a better word for that. And you also have different personalities in different languages as well, I find. So one of the things that I realized when I was writing the book and playing around with literal translations is I kind of developed this new appreciation for the way that Swedish creates compound words. Which I'd never really thought about before, to be honest, because it's just words. It's just so natural, isn't it? It's like you don't think about the root of words until you have a reason to.
Exactly.
And like, you know, the other day I was telling my partner about the Swedish word for strawberry. which which is jordgubbe. So jord is earth and gubbe is like little old man. So jordgubbe is, so strawberry is like little old man of the earth.
Oh, that's brilliant.
But
Oh, that's amazing.
and I think that's a wonderful thing about I mean, German has that as well, that there's a flexibility in the language which I don't think I appreciated as much, and that's one of the reasons I think that the book turned out the way it did, because I sort of realized that I wanted to fall into or lean into that multiplicity and lean into the feeling of being able to go back and forth. That maybe I didn't have to choose that, like, I'm now writing in English. That means I'm only allowed to write in English.
Yeah.
I could actually lean into the movement.
And I think this, one of the kind of beautiful facets of the book is that whilst it's, you know, talking about a lot of quite serious subject matters, and it has these lovely moments of reflection on kind of wider issues in society, it's got that lovely kind of sense of joy and celebration and humor around language, and on the kind of compound nouns as well, which are peppered throughout the book. And I feel like there must have been moments, there are a couple that I recognized from having chats with you, where you'd come into work and you'd be like, shield toad, and you'd realized, and it was that moment of discovery, I think, for you, and it popped up in the book, and I was like, oh, I remember you coming in and being like, oh, I'm working on it.
Yeah, well, there was a while while I was working on the book, when I was just whenever I kind of thought of one, I would write it down. I was kind of collecting literal translations of Swedish compound nouns.
That must have been a fun time. That must have been really interesting.
It was fun, yeah.
So, if at all possible, could I get you to do a little reading, and we'll have a lovely example of Jess speaking in Swedish, which is one of my, I love listening to you speaking in Swedish. It's totally different from, I mean, obviously it's, you know, a completely different language and is based on something, but I feel like your voice changes and everything changes. It's great fun.
Yeah, no, I think I told you this before, that when I speak Spanish, I sound like a tiny little person, a little human, and when I speak Swedish, it goes down quite a lot. Whereas in the book, there are two bits where you get what Lottie was saying, the double languages on the translation next to the text. The way we're going to do it on YouTube form is that I'm just going to read the Swedish, and then our colleague Gemma is going to edit in some subtitles afterwards.
Fingers crossed this one will.
Fingers crossed. Otherwise, this will be edited out.
This will all be gone.
Yeah, this will all be gone. And the thing to know about, so this is quite early on in the book, and Christine has just arrived at, she's going to see her line manager, who's called Johan Tarbuck, because she's left her phone in the translation room, which is, they're basically little spaces that everyone has spread all around the castle or around the immigration museum, where they have to go in each morning and prepare for the day. Essentially, like, cleanse themselves of English and just focus on only speaking their first languages, because so the line goes, that will make it more authentic for the tourists and the visitors who come to the museum. So I think that's all you need to know. Johann Tarbuck was having lunch in her office when I knocked on her door. She became team leader long before I started and still hasn't unpacked all her boxes. She says she loves it here, of course. The boxes may just contain secret pets, like a dozen stick insects. She carefully opened the door with a string of cheese bridging the gap between her mouth and a slice of pizza, expecting an assault team. Hey, I said. Oh crap, Johann Tarbuck said, and looked up and down the corridor. There was no one around to interpret. What is it? She said. Wait, don't answer that. Of course don't answer that. Jesus, Kirsten. She'd managed to drag almost the entire layer of cheese from the pizza and into her mouth in one clean carpet sweep, which meant we had to wait until she'd finished chewing. It took a long time. Det kommer en gammal människa upp för trappan, I said. On my way up from the royal palace entrance, I'd walked past a question mark-shaped woman holding a traffic cone. She was making her way up the stairs, stopping every couple of steps to reach out and touch the walls, closely examining the bricks and sniffing them. She did not seem out of breath. I walked slowly after her to check in case she collapsed. Now she was emerging at the end of the corridor. She stopped at the first office door and sniffed that too. It's Dave Boyle's aunt, said Joanne Tarbuck and turned back to me. Dave Boyle is the team leader for the Irish dock workers. Jag lämnade min telefon i mitt översättningsrum, I said. For Christ's sake, said Joanne Tarbuck, you can't stand out here. Let me call someone. Then she went inside and closed the door behind her, leaving me standing out there. Waiting for her to come back out, I made my face look non-understanding. It's a bit like pretending you haven't seen the use-by date on a yogurt because it still looks okay when you shovel it into your mouth. It's like the face people fall into the second before they're approached by someone asking them for money for a night's shelter. Just a couple of pounds is all that's missing. It took me the whole of my first year to get the hang of the non-understanding face. At the beginning, everyone flinches and turns their heads as if English was meant for them too, as if this were their story.
It's like normally we'd have an event and there'd be a lovely round of applause. Oh, it's so, I love, it's something that I completely fell for throughout the entirety of the book, was those little moments of observation that are really humorous, and they're like, to me, they're just so Jess, but they are wonderful, and they're kind of liberally smattered throughout the book, and I think it just completely lifts it to a whole other kind of realm. It's almost a different genre when you've got something like that. It doesn't fit into, one particular thing. It's not a very serious book. It's obviously got all of that to it, but it's so multi-layered and it's so enjoyable. And yeah.
Well, you know what? I think, as you and I have talked about books for years now, and I think something I realized quite late, as in when I've been writing for years and just in the last few years, is what humor means for me in my reading experience. That humor is like isn't separate from emotion and from sadness. It's part of the same body. It's almost like a continuation of it and part of the same movement. You can't have one without the other. And something that's humorous and where the humor does its job well, it makes the sad parts sadder, but it also kind of gives them meaning. Yeah. And that's that's what the way I would like to write.
Yeah. Well done.
I think it just shows care as well for the reader.
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to do, if you see the relationship with the reader as mutual, as actually giving something, and you imagine someone receiving it, you kind of want to delight them and you want to care for them, even though you might also want to go, wake up, the world is on fire, there needs to be something that is going to make them trust you and make them sort of feel taken care of.
Joy.
Yeah. And I'm all for, like, then in the next instance, jolting someone with an electric shock. Absolutely.
Oh, God, yeah.
But it's like, if it's all electric shock, then it's like that relationship is just numb. Cut off. Yeah.
That ability to contrast those moments is just so masterful. And yeah, you'll be very pleased to hear, I don't know if Callum said it to you, one of our colleagues, Callum Churchill, is another big George Saunders fan, and he was asking me how I was finding the book, and I was saying, I was completely loving it, and I was at this part when we were talking about it, And he went, oh yeah, Jess writes like George Saunders. It really reminds me of George Saunders. She uses these really clever tricks. And I was just like, yeah. George Saunders' writing is so incredibly kind of character based. You feel so internally involved in all of his characters, beings and their thoughts.
Yeah, I mean,
Very
he's
transporting.
definitely one of the people who sort of started waking me up to looking closer at a voice, I think.
Yeah.
Really, really looking at what it means to access a character through voice.
And I'd like to ask you more about this actually, because he's one of the influences that I think you can see in your writing. But who else would you say you've kind of drawn upon it? Who else has been a real inspiration for you whilst you've been writing?
I guess there are a couple of different ways of answering that question, and it's almost like saying, how your parents influenced you as a person. It's like, how do you, so it's like when I was 5, because I do think that probably everything that you've ever read goes into it, and I would hope so. I hope it's not just the stuff that you consciously seek out and that you were reading, in the year before you wrote a book, that leaves a print in there. I think it's probably a lot more than that. So I mean, I hope that the stuff when I started reading, and sort of fell in love with reading, as we all have that sort of period in our lives as teenagers or whatever. What I loved then was like Latin American magical realism. And Isabel Allende and Gabriel Garcia Marquez, because those were the books that my mum had around the house. And then later on, the sort of Swedish equivalent, which is the saga of Gösta Berling by Selma Lagerlöf, the first woman to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. And that's like that's very different kind of writing. It's quite epic, and the characters are larger than life and almost legendary. But I still, every now and then, I kind of, when I'm writing, I sort of, and really enjoying it, I think I find a sort of drive from those things and those really fundamental books that I can kind of access, but it's in a really subtle way.
One of the joys of interviewing authors in their own homes is that they have their space around them and all of their belongings around them. And I was very fortunate to interview Edward Carey on his new book very recently, and he is an incredibly creative man who has a number of bizarre belongings in his possession. So I asked him what the strangest thing in his home was. Jessica, what is the strangest thing in your home?
I feel like that whatever strange things in our home are probably not my belongings, but more my husband's belongings, because he's got quite a lot of trinkets. Just because of where I'm sitting, I feel like this maybe could that might be require an explanation.
They do, yeah.
So those are, I'm just trying to the big one, those are masks.
Nice.
Yeah, so the big one is called Old Mothy.
Of course.
He's a moth. He's a big, yeah.
Does what it says on the tin.
And you can't see him very well, but next to him is Old Owly, who's an owl mask. And these were masks that we made when my partner and I were part of the Beltane Fire Festival in Edinburgh. Back when we lived there, which is it's a yearly festival and part of a really nice community, a society. And the festival has been going for about 30 odd years, I think 35 years. They do one in the spring, celebrating the coming of the spring, and one in the autumn, around kind of All Hallows Eve. So yeah, we did that, and that's when we made these masks.
Whose is whose? Are you old Mothy or old
yeah, no,
Owly?
old Owly, the smaller one, was mine.
That's awesome.
Old Mothy was my partner's, because the way we met was he led a drumming group, so he had to actually, on the night of the festival, he had to wear this thing whilst whistling and leading a processional drumming group, which
It's quite
turned out to be a bit
wise.
of a problem.
I feel like that's going to cover the entire face and the whistle's not going to work so well.
That was a fault in the plan, definitely.
Jess, it's been such a pleasure. This has been really nice.
It's been lovely. It's been really good fun. We've been talking for way too long, and
I know.
our poor colleague is going to have to edit this down.
Gemma, I'm very sorry.
Sorry, Gemma.
Sorry, Gemma.
Oh, thanks,
Thank
dude.
you so much.
This was
No,
fun.
It's been a pleasure. And I will see you very soon. Bye.
Please note, no book people were harmed in the making of this film, though some were technologically challenged. All books are available from www.mrbeesemporium.com.